Hey, welcome back. I'm glad you're here today because we're going to talk about something that affects a lot of relationships. And it's something people don't always want to hear, but they need to. Have you ever been in a situation where your partner promises they're going to change something important, but then they don't? They say all the right words, they sound sincere, they might even get emotional about it, and you want to believe them. Of course you do. But then time passes and you realize nothing's different. Maybe this has happened once. Maybe it's happened 20 times and you're starting to wonder what's going on. Well, that's what we're going to dig into today. What's really happening when someone keeps promising to change but never does. Let me tell you what I see happening in these situations. You're sitting there listening to these promises, and in that moment, you feel relief, you feel hope, because the promise means you don't have to make any hard decisions right now. You don't have to leave. You don't have to set boundaries. You don't have to do anything difficult. All you have to do is believe them and wait. And that's exactly what you want to do because making hard decisions is scary. Walking away is scary. Enforcing consequences is scary. So you take the promise and you run with it. You convince yourself that this time is different. This time they really mean it. This time they're actually going to follow through. But deep down, you know better. You've been here before. You know how this story ends. Here's the thing nobody's telling you. When someone makes the same promise over and over again without ever following through, that's not about them struggling to change. That's about them knowing exactly what to say to keep you around without having to do anything different. Think about it. If they promise to quit drinking and they don't, then they promise again 6 months later and they don't, then they promise again a year later and they don't. What are they actually showing you? They're showing you that promises work. They're showing you that words are enough. They're showing you that they don't actually have to change because you're going to stay anyway. And you taught them that. Every single time you accepted a promise without requiring proof, you taught them that your standards are negotiable. Let me give you an example. I worked with a woman, let's call her Sarah, who'd been married for 22 years. Her husband had a serious anger problem, yelling, throwing things, punching walls, scaring the kids. And every few months, after a particularly bad episode, he'd break down crying and promise her it would never happen again. He'd swear on his life. He'd tell her how much he loved her and the kids. He'd promise to get help. And every single time, Sarah believed him. Or at least she told herself she did. She'd feel hopeful for a few weeks. Things would be calm. But then something would trigger him, and boom, right back to the same pattern. This went on for over a decade. 10 years of the same promises. 10 years of the same explosions. And when I asked Sarah why she kept believing him, you know what she said? She said, because I want to believe he can change. Not because he's shown me he can change. Not because I've seen evidence of change. But because she wants to believe it. And that's the heart of the problem right there. You're making decisions based on what you want to be true instead of what I is true. You're choosing hope over evidence. You're choosing potential over reality. And look, I get it. Nobody wants to accept that the person they love isn't going to change. Nobody wants to face the possibility that they've wasted years waiting for something that's never going to happen. But here's what you need to understand. Hope is not a strategy. Wanting something to be true doesn't make it true. And accepting promises without action isn't love, it's fear. You're scared of what happens if you stop believing them. You're scared of being alone. You're scared of disrupting your life. You're scared of admitting you've been fooling yourself. So you keep taking the promises because it's easier than facing reality. Now let's talk about what real change actually looks like, because I think you've lost sight of this. Real change isn't a promise. Real change is action. Real change has specific steps. Real change has a timeline. Real change has accountability built in. If someone tells you they're going to quit drinking, real change means they call AA that day. They go to a meeting that week. They get a sponsor. They check in with you daily. They remove alcohol from the house. They avoid situations where they're tempted. You see evidence. You see effort. You see progress. That's real change. You know what's not real change? Someone saying, I'm going to quit drinking, and then doing absolutely nothing different. No meetings, no support, no plan, just words. And if all you're getting is words, then you're not getting change. You're getting manipulation. Because here's what you need to hear. When someone knows they need to change something, but they're not willing to do the work, promises become a tool. They become a way to manage you. They become a way to buy time. They become a way to avoid consequences. Think about it from their perspective for a second. You're upset. You're threatening to leave, or you're demanding they get help, or you're setting some kind of boundary, and they're thinking, what do I need to say to make this go away? Not, what do I need to do to fix this, but what do I need to say? And they've learned over time exactly what works. They've learned that if they sound sincere enough, if they look emotional enough, if they make the promise convincing enough, you'll back off. You'll give them another chance. You'll reset the clock. And that buys them another few months or another year of not having to change anything. Let me be really clear about something. I'm not saying everyone who makes promises is consciously manipulating you. Some people genuinely believe they're going to change when they make those promises. They have good intentions in that moment. They really do feel bad. They really do want things to be different. But intention without action is meaningless. And if the pattern repeats itself over and over again, at some point, you've got to stop giving them credit for good intentions and start holding them accountable for their choices. Because here's the reality. If they wanted to change badly enough, they would. If the consequences of not changing were significant enough, they would. But they don't have to, because you're still there. You're still accepting it. You're still believing the next promise will be different. And that brings me to your role in all of this. Because yes, you have a role. You don't control their behavior. You're not responsible for their choices, but you are responsible for what you accept. You are responsible for your standards. You are responsible for your boundaries. And right now, your boundaries are non-existent. You say you want change, but you accept promises. You say you need proof, but you settle for words. You say you're fed up, but you keep staying. And that disconnect between what you say you want and what you're actually willing to accept, that's teaching them exactly how to treat you. You taught them that promises without proof are enough. You taught them that words can replace action. You taught them that there are no real consequences for not changing. And until you change what you're doing, nothing else is going to change either. I want you to think about something right now. How much time have you already invested waiting for this person to change? Months, years, a decade, more? And in all that time, what's actually different? Not what they've promised will be different, what's actually different. If the answer is nothing or very little, then you need to accept something really hard. You need to accept that you're choosing this. You're choosing to stay in a relationship where promises replace action. You're choosing to accept words instead of requiring proof. You're choosing to hope instead of making decisions based on reality. And that's your right. You can make that choice. But what you can't do is make that choice and then act like a victim. You can't choose to stay and then complain that nothing's changing. You can't choose to accept promises and then be shocked when they're empty. Let's talk about what this looks like in real time. Your partner messes up again. Maybe they drink too much. Maybe they blow up at you. Maybe they ignore the kids. Maybe they blow money you don't have. Whatever the issue is, it happens again. And you're angry. You're hurt. You're at your breaking point, and they can see it. So they launch into the apology. They tell you how sorry they are. They tell you it'll never happen again. They promise they're going to change. And you're standing there feeling all these emotions. Part of you wants to believe them. Part of you knows you shouldn't. Part of you wants to leave. Part of you is scared to. And in that moment, you've got to make a choice. Are you going to accept the promise or are you going to require action? Here's what accepting the promise looks like. You listen to their words. You feel that momentary relief. You tell yourself this time is different, and then you go back to normal. You don't set any consequences. You don't require any specific steps. You don't create any accountability. You just trust that they'll do what they said. And maybe for a few days or a few weeks, things are better. They're on their best behavior. They're trying. But slowly, things drift back. The trying stops. The old patterns return. And before you know it, you're right back where you started, waiting for the next explosion, waiting for the next promise, waiting for change that never comes. Now, here's what requiring action looks like. You listen to their words, but you don't accept them as proof. You say, okay, you say you're going to change. Here's what that needs to look like. And you get specific. If it's about anger, you say you're going to call a therapist tomorrow and schedule an appointment within the next week. You're going to go every week. You're going to give me permission to check in with your therapist about your progress. And if you miss appointments or quit therapy, I'm done. If it's about drinking, you say you're going to go to an AA meeting tomorrow. You're going to go at least 3 times a week. You're going to get a sponsor within 2 weeks. You're going to check in with me every single day about your sobriety. And if you drink again, I'm leaving. You create concrete expectations. You create a timeline. You create consequences. And then, and this is the critical part, you follow through. But here's where most people fail. They set the expectations. They might even set the consequences. But when it comes time to enforce those consequences, they don't do it. Their partner misses therapy, or they drink again, or they don't follow through on what they promised. And instead of leaving like they said they would, instead of enforcing the consequence like they said they would, they give another chance. They accept another promise. They reset the clock again. And in that moment, they teach their partner that consequences aren't real. They teach them that boundaries can be crossed. They teach them that words are still enough. And the cycle continues. I worked with another couple where the wife kept threatening to leave if the husband didn't stop his gambling. He'd promise every time. He'd swear he was done. He'd tell her he'd never do it again. And she'd believe him until she found another receipt or another credit card statement or another lie. And she'd threaten to leave again. And he'd promise again. This went on for 7 years. 7 years of the same pattern. And when I asked her why she never actually left, she said, "Because I keep thinking he'll finally mean it this time." But here's the thing. He did mean it every time. In that moment, he genuinely didn't want to gamble anymore. He genuinely felt bad. But meaning it and doing it are two completely different things. And she never required him to do anything. She just accepted the feeling behind the promise and hoped that would be enough. You know, what happened with that couple? She finally left. But it took her losing their house. It took their kids asking why daddy was always lying. It took her hitting rock bottom before she was willing to enforce a boundary. And you know what her biggest regret was? Not that she left, but that she didn't leave 7 years earlier. 7 years she'll never get back. 7 years of stress and lies and broken promises. 7 years she spent hoping instead of acting. And she looked at me and said, "I knew after the first year he wasn't going to change. I knew it, but I was too scared to face it." How many of you are living that right now? You already know. Deep down, you know, but you're too scared to face it. So you keep accepting the promises. Let's talk about what you're really afraid of, because that's what this comes down to. You're not staying because you believe the promises. You're staying because you're afraid of what happens if you stop believing them. You're afraid of being alone. You're afraid of starting over. You're afraid of admitting you wasted all this time. You're afraid people will judge you for leaving. You're afraid you won't find anyone else. You're afraid of the financial impact. You're afraid of disrupting your kids' lives. All of those fears are real. I'm not dismissing them. But here's what you need to ask yourself. Are those fears bigger than the reality of spending the next 5, 10, 20 years in the same pattern you're in right now? Because that's the choice. Your fears versus your reality. And let me tell you something about fear. Fear keeps you stuck. Fear makes you accept less than you deserve. Fear makes you believe promises without proof. Fear makes you stay when you should go. Fear makes you hope when you should act. And the longer you let fear run your decisions, the harder it gets to change. Because every year that passes, you've got more invested, more history, more excuses, more reasons to stay stuck. The best time to require change was the first time they made a promise they didn't keep. The second best time is right now. Not next month, not after the holidays, not after they promise one more time. Now, here's something else you need to understand about people who make empty promises. They're not necessarily bad people. They're not necessarily trying to hurt you, but they are showing you their priorities. And changing whatever that change needs to be is not high enough on their priority list to actually do it. Think about things you've changed in your life when you really wanted to. Maybe you quit smoking. Maybe you lost weight. Maybe you changed careers. Maybe you moved cities. When you really wanted something, you found a way. You made a plan. You took action. You followed through. Not perfectly, maybe, but you did it. So when someone keeps saying they want to change, but never does, what they're really telling you is that they don't want it enough. The discomfort of changing is greater than the discomfort of staying the same. And as long as you keep accepting that, they have no reason to tip that scale. You want to know why some people finally change after years of not changing? It's not because they finally woke up one day and wanted it more. It's because the cost of not changing finally became too high. They lost something important. Their partner actually left. Their kids stopped talking to them. They lost their job. They hit a health crisis. Something forced them to face consequences. And suddenly change became necessary instead of optional. But here's what kills me. Most of you are waiting for that crisis to happen naturally instead of creating consequences yourself. You're waiting for them to lose enough on their own instead of being willing to be what they lose. You're waiting for rock bottom instead of being willing to say, I'm your rock bottom, change or I'm gone. I had a guy tell me once, but Dr. Phil, I can't give her an ultimatum. That's manipulative. And I said, no, what's manipulative is making promises you don't keep to avoid losing someone. Setting clear expectations and consequences is called having standards. And that's where a lot of you are confused. You think requiring proof is being demanding. You think enforcing consequences is being controlling. You think setting boundaries is being harsh. But it's not. It's being someone who values themselves enough to not accept breadcrumbs. It's being someone who knows their worth. It's being someone who won't settle for potential when they deserve reality. Let me paint you a picture of what your life looks like from the outside. You're in a relationship with someone who repeatedly promises to change but doesn't. You complain about it to your friends. Your family sees it. Your kids see it if you have them. Everyone around you can see the pattern except you. Or rather, you can see it, but you won't do anything about it. And every time they make another promise, your friends roll their eyes because they know nothing's going to change. Your family feels bad for you because they watch you hoping and waiting and accepting. And you're starting to lose credibility with everyone around you because they've heard you say this time will be different 100 times and it never is. How's that feel? How's it feel to be the person everyone pities? How's it feel to be the person everyone knows is settling? And here's what really gets me. While you're sitting there accepting promises and waiting for change, you're also getting older. Time is passing. If you're 35 now and you spend another 5 years waiting, you're 40. If you're 45 now and you wait another 10 years, you're 55. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with being any age, but I am saying that every year you spend in a relationship that isn't working is a year you don't get back. It's a year you could have spent either fixing the relationship through real change or finding something better, but instead you're spending it hoping and waiting and accepting promises. Is that really how you want to use your life? Is that really the story you want to tell? You need to understand something about patterns. They don't break themselves. If you've been in the same pattern for 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, it's not going to magically change just because more time passes. The pattern is established. Both of you know your roles. They know they make promises and you know you accept them, and then nothing changes until the next crisis. That's the dance. And you've both been dancing it for so long that it's comfortable, it's familiar, it's predictable. And changing the dance requires one of you to stop doing your part. Since they're clearly not going to stop making empty promises, that means you have to stop accepting them. You have to change the dance by changing your steps. Here's what that looks like practically. Next time they promise to change, and there will be a next time, because that's the pattern, you don't accept it. You don't feel relief. You don't go back to normal. Instead, you say, I've heard this before many times, and it never leads to actual change. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to show me change through consistent action over the next 90 days, or I'm done. No more chances. No more promises. Proof, or I'm out. And then you stick to it. You don't negotiate. You don't extend the deadline. You don't accept excuses. 90 days, action, or you're gone. That's it. And I can already hear some of you saying, but Dr. Phil, what if they really try this time? What if 90 days isn't enough? If they're really trying, you'll see evidence way before 90 days. You'll see them taking action within days, within a week at most. Real change doesn't wait. Real change doesn't procrastinate. Real change starts immediately because the person is genuinely committed. So if you set a 90-day deadline and they haven't started showing you real effort within the first week or two, they're just hoping you'll forget or soften or accept another promise. Let me tell you about another couple I worked with. Married 18 years. Husband had been promising to help more with the kids and the house for the entire marriage. 18 years of I'll do better, 18 years of I promise I'll help more, and nothing ever changed. The wife did everything, worked full time, managed the kids, managed the house, managed everything, and she was exhausted, resentful, barely hanging on. And one day she snapped. She didn't yell. She didn't cry. She just said, I'm done accepting your promises. Either you start doing 50% of the household work and childcare starting today, or I'm moving to the guest room and we're living as roommates until I can afford to leave. No emotion, no drama, just facts. You know what happened? For the first week, he tried. He really did. He helped with dishes. He got the kids ready for school a couple mornings, and he was feeling pretty proud of himself. But by week 2, he was slipping back, coming home late, being too tired, making excuses. And his wife didn't say a word. She just moved to the guest room, no fight, no threats. She just did what she said she'd do.